So, the moving on to the last artist of the evening and the least famous of the three, we've got television.
By a lot.
Yeah. And in the opening montage, you heard Friction, and now you're going to hear the title track, Marquee Moon.
1970s on Best Ever Albums. Number 3 in 1977, and number 47 of all time. Top 50, and in Rolling Stone, 107. So we almost got 3 albums that were in the top 100 in Rolling Stone and Best Ever Albums. So, yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, Television is a very influential band, as you can probably tell by that ranking. And it was formed by Tom Verlaine, Richard Lloyd, Richard Hell, and Billy Fica. And initially, Tom and Richard Lloyd met in private school in a school called Sanford School in Delaware, and they were friends there. But then apparently they both ran away or dropped out and went to New York City to become poets. I don't know the timing of that, but they said they both did. So when they were in New York, they formed a group called the Neon Boys, which lasted about a year from 72 to 73. And
Fun fact, that's our other nickname besides CTS is the Neon Boys, yes.
Verlaine was on guitar, Hell was on bass, and Billy Fica was on drums. The day after they broke up, so it was Richard Hell and Tom Verlaine that met in school, not Richard Lloyd. So the day after they broke up, the Neon Boys, on March 13th, 1973, they reformed as Television and added Richard Lloyd as another guitarist. So it was really a day where they weren't a band and then they became a band again.
Okay.
Like many other bands in New York City that we've talked about, they played several shows at both CBGB's and Max's Kansas City in early 74 to get their start, and they returned to CBGB's where they became part of the residency that we've talked about before. Songwriting was initially done by both Verlaine and Hell, and eventually everyone except Hell became increasingly proficient at their instruments and at songwriting and composition, and it seemed like Hell was intentionally not trying to get better at times, so that created tension within the band. Also, I guess they didn't, Verlaine especially didn't really like his stage antics. He was pretty crazy on stage and wild. So that, coupled with one of their songs getting picked up by Island Records, which we talked about Island Records with Bob Marley, and that was a big indie label. Richard Hell then left the band as a result. But don't feel too bad, because then he went on to co-found the Heartbreakers in 1975 with the New York Dolls, Johnny Thunders, and Jerry Nolan. Fred Smith from Blondie then came in to replace him as Television's bassist, and quickly was a much better fit with the group. They basically found a lot of commonalities in the music they liked with him, and that reflected in the creation of this album, especially with jazz and rock and roll. Verlaine, you'll be happy to know John cited the 13th Floor Elevators as one of his
I heard that. I definitely heard that. Yeah,
Yep.
That's funny you say that.
That, coupled with jazz, was kind of his influence.
But no electric jug on this album,
not
Josh.
on this one.
No.
Can't say the second album, but they started getting record deals pretty immediately in late 74 and were turning them down. Verlaine was really looking for creative control in the recording contract. They even recorded demos with Brian Eno making an appearance again in December of 74 with him. They recorded 4 songs that were on this album, or demos of 4 of these songs that appeared on the album. But Verlaine did not like Eno's sound, saying that it was too harsh or hard sounding. And he was looking for something different. At one point in 75, they shared a residency with Patti Smith at CBGB's, and was recommended to Arista Records' Clive Davis by Patti Smith's boyfriend, Alan Lanier. Verlaine was hesitant to sign with them, though, but they did record demos with Arista also. And while Verlaine said he liked the demos more than Eno, citing a much warmer sound, he was still holding out for a label that would let him produce the record. Television released a 7-inch single in 75 titled Little Johnny Jewel, Parts 1 and 2. on their manager Terry Ork Records, small label. And then also at this time, Richard Lloyd considered leaving the band, I guess due to a strong disagreement with that song being their first release, and he wanted something else. And apparently Pere Ubu's guitarist Richard Loeffner even auditioned for a spot in the band at one time. So
it all comes full circle.
Yeah, all this crossover with artists
right
now. In August of '76, they finally signed with a record label, Elektra Records, and they promised Verlaine that he could produce the album, provided that he be assisted by a well-known recording engineer. And so in comes Andy Johns as that recording engineer. That name may sound familiar to you because he is not only the younger brother of Glenn Johns of Beatles fame, but also Andy Johns was the recording engineer on the Rolling Stones' Sticky Fingers, Exile on Main Street, Goat's Head Soup, Led Zeppelin 2 through 4, Houses of Holy, Physical Graffiti, among other albums, and he co-produced this album.
Some of those records, they're okay.
Yeah, and we talked about most of those actually.
Yeah.
So Andy Johns from a long lineage of good rock records. In prep for recording of this album, which was to start in September of '76, the band was practicing 4 to 6 hours a day, 6 to 7 days a week. And during that time, they really rejected most of the material that they had written or done up to this point, and ended up recording 2 new songs, Guiding Light and Torn Curtain, on this album, as well as using some staples from their live shows like Marquee Moon, Friction, and Venus. Andy Johns recorded most of the band live in the studio. A few of the songs were recorded in one take, like Marquee Moon, and I think Richard Lloyd didn't even realize that they were going to use that track or that take, and Verlaine was like, "It's good enough." So I guess they practiced, paid off. The cover photo of the album was taken by Robert Mapplethorpe, who shot Patti Smith's Horses cover, as I covered back then. And then Marquee Moon was obviously their debut release, and it was released February 8th, 1977, and then on March 4th in the UK. The album had 2 singles, Marquee Moon and Prove It. Both singles charted in the UK top 30, and this band was much more popular in the UK and Europe, and they really didn't make a dent at all in the US. They didn't break the Billboard Top 200, and the album sold fewer than 80,000 copies. While on vacation in London, Verlaine saw that they were popular over there, and he called the record company to press for a UK tour, saying, we should capitalize on this popularity. And however, the label had already signed them to an American tour as the opening act to Peter Gabriel. And Peter Gabriel fans did not respond to television. And the band found that tour frustrating, and for obvious reasons, and didn't go over well. However, they did go on tour in the UK in May of '77 with Blondie as their supporting act. Again, another crossover there with CBGBs, and
it's another odd fit too.
Yep. Well, Verlaine thought the same thing. He thought Blondie was too different stylistically to them, and Chris Stein of Blondie said that television was too competitive and not accommodating while on tour, and they didn't really have a good time with them. By the time that happened, Elektra really had given up promoting Marquee Moon in the U.S. It wasn't selling well, despite meeting critical acclaim. It was on the Village Voices like best albums of the year that year, and other critics really liked it as well, especially in the UK. As I said, it didn't sell well in the US and it didn't crack the Billboard. They did record a second album called Adventure, released in April of '78. It was also well received, but critically, but didn't sell. Kind of has a softer sound, it's been described as. I didn't listen to it, but I am curious. So based on that, the band really broke up in July of '78 due to different artistic visions among the band members and kind of their strong personal preferences. Verlaine and Richard Lloyd went on to pursue solo careers, and Fika became the drummer for the new wave band The Waitresses. Now, I didn't know The Waitresses, who they were at first until I looked up their songs. And they have that Christmas song called Christmas Wrapping that is really always played at Christmas time and sounds like a new wave song. And then they also have I Know What Boys Like, among other songs.
Oh, yeah, I know that song.
So Television did reform in 1992. I don't know why, probably for money. And
I think I know why. We'll talk about it later.
And they released a third self-titled album and are still technically an active band despite not having released an album since then.
What makes them technically still an active band?
I guess
it just says that they are.
They just say they're not done.
Yeah.
Like theoretically, working on our next album.
And then ending on a positive note, all the former and current members of the band are still alive. So,
hey!
All right.
So there you go. Still time for another tour by them. Maybe we'll see them someday. But that's really it. The band was not around too long. I think that's kind of contributes to their cult status and their influence. But Matt, what did you think of Television's Marquee Moon?
I loved this album. This has got all the stuff that I would be looking for in a record. This is I knew Marquee Moon. I've heard that before, but I didn't know really any of these other songs. And I was just, it's one of those things, like I didn't know exactly what to expect. I've heard of this record. I've known of this band, like all the, there's the stories about how it just, they weren't big and then they were just influential and stuff. So I was like, okay. And as soon as from the get-go, right off the bat, See No Evil, I love that opening guitar part. That guitar riff's really good. And I was just like right up in front, upbeat, energetic, and, and there's just melody throughout this record. I love a lot of the guitar tones on stuff like Guiding Light. There's just a really crisp, really modern sounding guitar sound there. And so the production's great, and the vocals of Verlaine, I like he's kind of got that. I don't know how to describe it. There's a little bit of a scratchy, piercing nature to it, a little David Byrne-esque. I guess that's but
it reminded me of Cold War Kids and maybe like Velvet, Violet Femmes.
Yeah,
singing.
Exactly. It seemed like an amalgamation of just a bunch of other singers that I've heard throughout the 80s, 90s, 2000s, what have you. Just indie rock, kind of like that type of singing structure sound. So in that sense, it does have some edge. I thought it was going to be a little bit more edgy. I probably was a little bit more surprised at how accessible the overall record was, and so I was pleasantly surprised by that. But I also thought that there was enough edgy nature of it to kind of and interesting musical pieces throughout that kept it interesting. But also couched in some 50s stuff. Like there's stuff in here that's kind of got like a 50s doo-wop sound to it. And this is just, I could totally see why this was influential for a lot of artists that I've liked, because it just sounds right up their alley, of stuff that I gravitate towards. I love the Marquee Moon, the guitar, the like kind of like the instrumental part towards the middle part and the end is really great. I love how that builds up and then they bring it all back into the original structure of the song. It's just a fun record, really interesting. Amazing that this is 1977 and you've got a record that sounds like this, and it makes me go, how have I not heard of this before, or heard nobody ever played it for me, right? I never bought the album. I kind of just knew that it was out there. So big thumbs up on this. This is one of my favorite records that we've covered this decade. So it's got so many elements of stuff that I like. So huge fan of this. Big thumbs up.
Yeah, I'm starting to buy into Josh's theory about one-word band names of inanimate objects, because, this is another one of those bands that fit that criteria that I really like. I purposely didn't want to read up on this band so that I could just give my unfiltered takes and then kind of see where it resonated with stuff. The big three things I wrote down were, number one, the two guitars is the thing I most notice in this. I think it's two guitars and bass for sure, but I love the variation of the guitars and almost how they were playing like different guitar. It's like there were two lead guitarists. And so I guess one of them's nominally like playing rhythm, right? But it doesn't feel like it. It feels like two different guitar parts always running around. It's got that ringing guitar sound that I think of with indie rock as well. I don't really know how to describe it, except it sounds at times like
I know what you mean.
Like a ringing sound, but they're not both playing the ringing sound. One's playing the ringing sound, and then the other is either playing a rhythm line or more of a traditionally wide open blues based guitar, I would say. The ringing guitar is not jangle guitar. So if somebody's like, oh, it's not that like Rickenbacker sound. It's a different sound that's hard to describe, but it's all over this album. So that's the first thing that I mentioned. The second was, this is another one of these bands that like is definitive. You didn't even need to tell me they were from New York. They sound like a New York band. They're like, they have the same thing going for them. I would say they're very similar lyrically and sonically in terms of the vibe, not the set as the Strokes, in that they're writing about like being young and in the city in New York, right? And just what New York is. Like, it just has a real New York vibe to it, the whole album. And as I dug into the lyrics, while it doesn't completely telegraph that it's that, most of the songs are kind of like about being out at night, which of course also plays into New York, right? But it's also got a little of that Velvet Underground where it's like a definitively New York sound. I just can't describe it, but I always can tell the artists that were in or around New York, because in the same way that like the Laurel Canyon groups, right, had a certain sound, like New York groups had a certain sound to them. So that was the number 2 thing I want to say. And yeah, there was psychedelia. And it's funny you mentioned 13th Floor Elevators, just because I heard like elements of psychedelia, and I think what Matt was calling like 50s or 60s rock was like almost like surf rock kind of at times.
Yes, I wrote surf rock down on
Friction. Like psychedelia and like surf rock at times. Like I heard bits and pieces, but also like what would become indie rock. Like guitar-driven indie rock, both the production of it and the sound. You guys already mentioned some bands that were definitely good comparative points. But yeah, I really like this album. As Matt said, this is an album that sounds way ahead of its time, for sure. And it is... I love the fact that it isn't as easy to compare it to other specific groups, even though you can go into different stuff. And I think that's what makes the album so good, is it's not like, oh, this is this thing, but after, or it's kind of like a lot of great albums. It's kind of an amalgamation of things, but doesn't sound disjointed. It homogenizes into like its own thing. Yeah. And later I could definitely say, oh, they kind of sound like Television. But like Television doesn't sound exactly like anything else directly, and I love bands like that where they can take it and run with it. So.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, because I'm like, there's other bands that I'm thinking of that just aren't popping in my head, and it's so many bands. That's probably why.
Yeah. But not exactly. You know what I mean? It's just bits and pieces, and then they're their own thing, and then eventually you get to it and you go, well, Television, I guess, sounds like Television.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, for a band that's ostensibly a punk rock band, they carved out their own niche in some way. There's some avant-garde elements to this. I feel like that jazz influence that I read about definitely comes into play in some way. And I also noticed kind of the interplay between the guitars. There's like a back and forth there, some sort of like crossover at times. And they also aren't afraid to go instrumental. There's like these long solos at times in musical parts, especially on like Marquee Moon, which is a 10-minute song. But
I wrote it's like the Ghostbusters, like when they shoot the guns, right? And sometimes they combine together, but also they're their own things. That's what it felt like at times as an analogy.
Yeah, that they seem to. I feel like there's some depth there musically to this album that's worth re-listening to. There is some, I guess with the composition or something, there is an added element there that is worth exploring that I picked up on. They don't sound, I mean, they seem definitely like Velvet Underground influence, as like almost every band that we've talked about in the late 70s New York is.
Hence my text to you guys.
Yeah. but they are like an offshoot of that. They're not really they don't have the same energy as Velvet Underground, and they're also, I think, trying to go for something different. The other band that came to mind when listening to this was Yo La Tengo. I feel like there are some instrumental aspects to them and some jamming out that reminded me of Television a lot. I think I even wrote they're like a punk rock jam band in some ways. I don't know if that's...
But it's punk rock. It's interesting. I know they're in that scene and everything like that, but this doesn't sound punk rock to me. Like there's so many other things that come to mind.
Is it like
punk
the
rock.
energy? Because like I know like people like Patti Smith are also called punk rock, but they don't seem like the traditional sound of punk rock.
I don't really think of them as punk rock in the way like the Sex Pistols or the Clash are tradition, or the Ramones even, but I guess they're more just like that New York City late 70s rock that I really respond to. I think the other thing that's a strength of this album, besides Marquee Moon's like guitar part that gets in your head, is I think it's really hook driven on this album. Every song has like a really good chorus, or parts that you can sing along to or hum along to, and that's different from some of the other bands that we've listened to that are in the same era. I was really impressed with this album. Shame they didn't really do more as a band.
No kidding.
I'm interested to see what everyone says. From what I read, that the second album is different sounding in terms of its tone and feel, so I'm interested to see what that's like. But I really like this band, and I agree there is some quality to Television that indie rock has taken, either guitar wise or musically, and I can't put my finger on it, but I heard it too when listening to this band.
So, and it's a good mix of a variety of things, and like I said, it's one of those things that's got like it's got the edgy nature to it. It's I wouldn't say, it doesn't really strike me as being terribly, avant-garde necessarily, although, because there's not a lot of discordant stuff happening here, because that's kind of what I think of when I like, that's like an off note, or that's like an off beat, but there's some structures here of the music that's just like really, just interesting, like cool little guitar licks, or just, like a song like Torn Curtain, which is kind of like this, it's like a slower ballad kind of a thing, but it's just got this really passionate kind of, just the way he's singing Torn Curtain. He's not even really, it's not even like a huge part of the song, but like, it just adds such a layer to it, to what the overall sound is. And I love his voice. I think that the voice is another strong part too, as well as I noticed the guitars as well. I wasn't really picking it exactly like what you guys were saying, but I totally see what you're getting at. And I think sometimes the guitars are even doing the same things, the same notes, but it's almost like they have a different tonal quality of the guitar, so it sounds different, but they're actually playing the same thing, just doing maybe a little bit differently, but there's enough of a variation there in the sound that makes it sound like a much different thing. Yeah.
There is a lot, it seems like, at least on the Wikipedia article, like describing their sound and stuff. I didn't try and read that too much while I was listening, but it does seem like their technical proficiency on their instruments plays into their compositions and stuff, and I think they are trying either like playing in minor chords or playing things in different fashions than other bands were doing. I think that contributes to their sound.
Yeah, they seem too musically skilled to be truly punk.
Yeah.
At least to me.
Well, and the music's more, it's too complex, right? Punk's usually much more straightforward. This is not, I wouldn't say that this is necessarily straightforward,
Yep. And this is and John brought up the lyrics. I didn't really focus on them too much when doing the band, but I did pick up on some of his kind of double entendres or play on words in his lyrics. I appreciated that.
Mm-hmm.
What did Verlaine do after, like, did he, like, I know Television didn't go further, but like, I didn't really see anything that he did, so it's kind of surprising that like he pretty much wrote all these songs and then just stopped. Well,
it looks like he went solo and he put multiple albums out in the 80s. Don't know what those are like, but then he put some more stuff out in the 90s, and obviously they reunited Television too, so his bio is pretty short on
I just looked. He was a member of a group called the $1 Million Bashers, which was a super group that included Wilco guitarist Nels Cline, Bob Dylan bassist Tony Garnier, Sonic Youth guitarist Lee Ronaldo, and Steve Shelley was also in that as well. So 2 members of Sonic Youth, a member of Wilco, a Bob Dylan session band, and then a keyboardist, and then another guitarist. So that's kind of like a indie rock.
Yeah.
No, he did do a lot of solo albums. I do see that here. He's got a lot, but the highest rated solo album is his self-titled album, and it was ranked 2,679 in the 70s. So
We will not be covering that.
we are not covering that, no. But geez, this is a great album. Like, wow.
There you go. Yeah, I agree. This is a high recommend for me, for sure.
Yeah, I really liked it too. And
Well,
I think it grew. I think it grew on me too. The more I listened to it,
Yeah.
I feel like there is some quality that I appreciate it more and more.
Yeah, it's one of those records that the first time you hear it, you're like, oh, this is great. And then it just keeps getting better. That's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, I felt that way too. It presented pretty quickly. Would you say, Josh, for you, it was a grower, not a shower, or was it a shower from the beginning?
I would say that. I responded to, I liked it on the first listen, but I didn't love it. And then the more I listened to it, I liked it more.
There you go. All right, well, check that out.